Welcome to the AVAIL Podcast, where we dig deep and talk about the art of leadership. My name is Virgil Sierra, and today we're sitting down with Wayne Alcorn. Wayne, with his wife Lynn, have been the senior pastors of Hope Center in Queensland, Australia since 2000. He also currently serves as the national president of the ACC, Australian Christian Churches. Wayne is a visionary leader and a great communicator who is passionate about empowering the local church, raising the next generation of leaders, and speaking to men. Today, Wayne will share about his new book, My Father's Son, Hope for Generations, and why it's so important for Christian men to get honest and humble in order for healing to come. So, get ready, leaders, and let's get started. Welcome back, everybody. We're back at the AVAIL Podcast, where we talk about the art of leadership with amazing leaders, ministry leaders, pastors, authors, all of the above, who will challenge us and encourage us as we walk through this art called leadership. Today, we have the blessing and the privilege of connecting with a great pastor, also an author, an amazing leader, none other than Wayne Alcorn. Pastor Wayne, it's good to have you here on the AVAIL Podcast. How are you doing?
Hey, Virgil. Great. Thank you. It's an absolute honor to be here on the AVAIL Podcast. Yeah, I'm excited to be here.
This is so good. And I have to mention this, Pastor Wayne, because the people that are either listening to the podcast or watching this on YouTube, they have no idea. But I'm in South Florida. You are in Australia. You're already in tomorrow. I'm in yesterday for you.
Yeah. And can I tell you, Virgil, it's okay. You can come on over. Tomorrow is fine. We're there.
I appreciate that. That's great. Hey, I want, before we jump into the conversation, specifically about your new book, which is entitled My Father's Son, Hope for Generations. I want our AVAIL audience just to get to know you a little bit. So can you share a little bit the overview of who is Pastor Wayne Alcorn?
Wow, that's a big question. So here it goes. I'm an Australian. I'm a preacher's kid. I'm actually a preacher's father as well. So I'm from a generation of men and women that have served God. But my story goes back to my father's story, and I'll pick that up in a moment. But right now, I am the senior pastor of a multi-site church called Hope Center, based here in the state of Queensland, Australia. It's the tropical state. It's probably a little like Florida, and it's beautiful. People in Australia, people are one of two parties. They're either Queenslanders or they're people that wish they were. So we're in the holiday state of our nation, and it's beautiful up here. I'm a young man who came to Christ not as a child, but into my early 20s. And soon after coming to faith, God put his hand clearly upon my life. In fact, replaying the steps, you realize that it was always there. But that call of God I suppressed right through my child and teen years, and came to faith just after my 20th birthday. And soon after that, I found myself as a voluntary youth leader, quickly stepped into new levels of leadership, became a youth pastor in my local church. In that process, the Holy Spirit was working on my heart. And with a few friends, we birthed a ministry here in our nation called Youth Alive. And I led Youth Alive for the best part of 2 decades in our nation. We recently celebrated 40 years of that ministry, and an audit was done to celebrate the 40 years. And we found that through those heady years, that evangelism was really just such a dynamic force and activity within our ministry. 320,000 first-time decisions for Jesus were recorded by Aussie teens. But as you can see by the color of my hair, there came a point in time that I had to leave youth ministry. And for me, that was quite a sad day. But in the process, my wife and I took on a church in the downtown area of our capital city here called Brisbane. We saw God move amazingly in those early days, and the church took off. It grew and grew and grew. And the end result is the church is now multi-site, covering the 5 cities of the greater region of our city of Brisbane. And there's a vibrant campus in each of them. Since 2009, I became the national leader of our group of churches called the Australian Christian Churches. And
Hmm.
there's 1,100 churches here in our nation that are ACC, and from here we've got missionaries all across the globe. And that's my journey, and it's been quite a wild ride. We're grateful to see how God has blessed so many areas of our ministry. But I know AVAIL's a leadership podcast. I'm smart enough to know, and I'm honest enough to know that it's not always been easy. So it all sounds good when you get the sound bite, but like every one of us, there are challenges in leadership. But hey, we're still standing. So that's
Yes.
who we are, and just the goodness of God is something that we celebrate daily.
That's so good. I appreciate you sharing that. And it is true. I think Sam Chan sometimes calls it bleedership. If you're not bleeding, you're not
Yeah,
leading.
hey,
And
I've
there
heard him
are
preach that. Sam's been to our national conference twice, Virgil,
wow.
he's talked about that very concept. And to be honest, it helps. It helps to
Yeah.
know that you're not the only leader going through a tough day.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and
That's
but
so
here's the other
good.
good news: we all get through it, right? We all get
What
through it.
100%. I'm so excited for this conversation, Pastor Wayne, because I think, I know God's given you a voice throughout your, I think, spanning over 4 decades of ministry and still going strong. And let's talk about your new book, My Father's Son, Hope for Generations. From the conversations I've had with you, it sounds like this is something that's deep within your heart. Why don't you share with us, why did you write this book, My Father's Son? Why the book? And why now? And why do you think God is going to use this?
I received an email last night from a man. We did a book launch in our local church. We launched it a couple of weeks ago at a conference and had tremendous response already. It's been quite overwhelming. But some of the
Mm,
men in my church said, you know something, this isn't a book, it's a mission. And
mm,
our men want to be part of this. So we did a really informal, low-key men's event in our local church last Saturday night. And it was really burgers and a chat. And I was just overwhelmed. Hundreds of men came out. And I received an email just last night from a man that was there. And he said, I know, Pastor Wayne, you're saying this is your story, but it's our story.
wow.
It's the story of every man. And that gave me, just such great encouragement because I think there's a two-part answer to that very good question, Virgil. Here's
Mhm.
the first reason I wrote the book. At the end of 1999, we were coming into, the year 2000, and everyone's freaking out. It's Y2K, we're all keeping water because we're all going to die. We're still here. But as we came towards that year 2000, I knew that my years of youth ministry were coming to an end. And I'm sitting on the front row of a major church in a city down south, and the Lord put something in my heart, and this was it. You spent the last 2 decades helping young people. Now it's time to help their fathers help them.
Wow.
And it was such a mandate upon my heart. Soon after that, we finished our exciting era in Youth Alive and took on a church. And if I'm not in my local church, there are two things that I'm doing. I'm speaking to leaders or I'm speaking to men.
Hmm.
And I've realized in speaking to men, whether it's a conversation at a barbecue or whether it's at a conference or after a church service, I'm finding there are some common themes and common trends that just had to be addressed. And the reason I'm particularly passionate about that is just the story of our own family. My father passed away just on 18 months ago. He was a legend. They
Wow.
called him the sheriff. He was a guy that all his life would go into situations that just needed fixing, and he brought life and health, and just a grand old man who we celebrated, who passed on at 94 years of age.
Wow.
But when he was 24, he was the town drunk in a small
Wow.
country town. His father was a World War I vet. The entire family line in my father's family, up until the time he was 24, the entire family was broken. Alcoholism,
Mm,
abuse, and pain. It's tragic. And my father has a record. He was in trouble with the police. And there was a Sunday night that he came out of another night that he'd spent in jail where the police had locked him up because he was drunk and disorderly. And He was wandering through town with a few of his friends. He didn't have a shirt on, he didn't have shoes on, and he'd had all his teeth removed because they were all falling apart. And this absolute wreck of a human being is standing on a street corner listening to a small bunch of Christians do what we call over here an open air meeting, just, a little group where they're standing on the back of an old pickup, some people singing, a guy or two sharing their faith. And at the end of that, this little group of singers stood up and sung, come home, all who are weary, come home. And my dad walked out of the crowd and walked forward. And his friends thought he was going to do what he always done. He'd go looking to start another fight. But instead, he got to that old pickup and he dropped to his knees. He gave his life to Christ. And he was drunk. And his prayer was simply this: dear God, if you can help me stand up, I'll believe that you're real and I'll give you my life. And wind the clock forward 70 years. And
Wow.
we're having this funeral. It was a large funeral, either in person or online. They tell me there's 1,500 people there, which that's a lot of people when you're 94. And my niece stood up amongst, my sons, and our nieces and nephews stood up and shared their reflections on their granddad. But I'll never forget one of the girls. She stood up and there was a big photo on the screen behind her of my dad. And she said, I wonder what the people that saw my granddad staggering, rolling drunk through the small country town 70 years ago would think of the crowd that's here to celebrate his life and the legacy of this patriarch. And she stopped and she looked at the crowd and she said, there's only one difference between that drunk and that legend, and it's Jesus. and I look back on his life and I realized that one decision by him over 70 years ago not only changed his life, but our entire family's trajectory.
Yep.
All his kids now are professionals. Many of them are in ministry. Most of us are either preachers or school teachers. Kids, grandkids, the entire family flourishing. And it was all because one man made one decision. And it so motivates me daily to realize our past does not have to define us.
Yeah.
But our future is only determined by decisions we make. And so really that's the motivation. I've seen what community and society needs, but I've also been somebody who's the recipient of what can happen when men make the right decisions.
What a difference it makes when a man takes a step. I mean, it affects the future. It affects their family. I think this is one of the most important subjects that we as Christians and as leaders can embrace. Now, the part one of your book specifically is kind of under the heading, the father wound. I think it's evident and it's obvious that sometimes a lot of the pain in people's lives is connected to this father wound. Can you unpack that a little bit?
Right now in our nation, we have a massive problem, as I think you do too, with juvenile crime.
Yeah.
My early years of leadership were all involved with youth. And I replay those years, Virgil, and I can't think of one young man or young woman that I ever went to court with that had a good relationship with their father. The dad was either missing, negligent, violent, the list goes on. And as this project started to unfold, I got about talking to so many men, and it was amazing to hear their stories. I was humbled by their willingness and their honesty as they told the story of homes that were filled with domestic violence. I had a politician who said to me, my home wasn't filled with violence. Politician's son who said to me, my home wasn't filled with violence. When my father was there, he was still absent. He said, I don't recall my father ever being at a football game that I played in. And he said, even when we'd go on holidays, we'd book a beautiful place to go away for holidays. He'd only be there for 3 or 4 days, and the entire time he was there, he was on the phone. Other people told me their pain of a father that died suddenly when they were young. Others obviously through the pain of divorce, and so many marriages are failing, and it's painful not only for the husband and the wife, but obviously the children. And I realized that there's just so many people wrestling with those issues that happened when they were in those formative years. And then you wind the clock forward, and so many people have just never addressed it. We've never got honest about it. We've pushed it down. We've dressed it up. We've got on with life and had certain successes. But it's amazing how many people are still carrying this thing, and it never goes away unless you get honest about it. You bring it to light. You bring it to some friends, but more importantly, you bring it to your God, and the healing journey can begin.
Yeah, that's good. I think you have an interesting perspective on this whole subject. You mentioned it right at the top of this podcast. You mentioned you are the son of a preacher, but you're also the father of a preacher. So there's something to say also about just kind of generation to generation. There's an impact here. Now, clearly you've identified a big problem, and a big problem is the father wound. It's the fact that there's so much pain for a lot of people, and everybody's story is not the same. But it's significant enough that it can affect a nation. It can affect generations.
Correct.
In your book, what are some of the things that you touch on regarding a solution or help, or, even us, many of us are leaders. Many of us are pastors. Many of us are leading in ministry or in the community. Give us some help. Can you give us some handles? How can we help restore? How can we help heal? How can we help bring help to this generation? Christian leaders around the world are taking advantage of their free annual subscription to the AVAIL Journal. After all, each one of us should be taking the next step in our leadership journey. When you sign up for a free annual subscription to the AVAIL Journal, you'll enjoy interviews, articles, resources, and much more. For more information and to get subscribed today, visit availjournal.com.
Virgil, I don't think we're going to help anybody unless we start getting honest.
Right.
Acknowledging that it's there. I know there's a lot of pastors and leaders that are dialing into this podcast. I spoke to a lot of leaders. I lead a lot of leaders. I lead 3,500 even in our own movement. And just because we're a pastor and a leader doesn't mean we're not still walking with a limp. And I remember a friend of mine, a pastor of many, many years experience. He's an old fishing buddy, actually. He rang me one day and he said, "Do you want to come out?" I said, "I can't. I'd love to go out on the boat, but I just can't. I'm busy. I've got to finish this book." And he asked me, he said, "Well, yeah, what is that book about?" And I told him, and because the heartbeat of the church, of the book, which isn't just for the church, it's for the community. The heartbeat is that the Father, God the Father, gives humanity a challenge. The last verse of the Old Testament says, God speaking, I need to heal the relationship between the fathers and the children of the fathers. Otherwise, the earth is going to be under a curse. 400 years of silence. Nothing further written, nothing seemingly heard and imparted into the canon of Scripture until the voice of God is heard 4 centuries later. And it's when Jesus, the Son of God, is being baptized. And the Father says 3 things. You're my son, I love you, and I'm proud of you. And the great heartbeat and premise of the book is every boy needs to hear, you're my son, I love you, and I'm proud of you. And if they don't, there's always a void that cannot be filled by anyone or anything until they have a revelation of the Father heart of God. Now, I was telling my friend this one day, and I said, I can't come out. I have to finish this book. And I said, right now I'm writing the chapter on the Father's love of the Son. He says, I love you. And I heard this mature man's voice crack. He's a leader. He's a pastor of decades experience. And I said, are you okay? He said, you know something? He said, I'm a pastor. My father was a pastor. But I never once heard him say he loves me.
Wow.
He said, I heard him tell his church he loved it. I heard him tell other people he loved them, but he said, it's really because he never received it from his dad. And Jesus, did he not say, freely you receive, so you can freely give? I think some of us, even as leaders, never received the love we needed
Mm-hmm.
And so we struggle to pass it on at times. And so I think, in answer to your original question, how do we as pastors and leaders help others? I think, number one, tell your own story. If our story is amazing, others will want it. If our story's not amazing, others will relate to it. You know, I tell leaders all the time, people aren't that interested in your stars, they're more interested in your scars.
Right.
Like, you know, if I hear today saying, I'm amazing, I've done incredible things, people go, yeah, good on you, we'll give you a little clap, and then and then move on. But when I get up and say, I have this scar, what I'm saying is, I had pain in this area of my life, but hey, the scar says it's healed now. And let me tell you about my healing journey. And it's amazing.
Good.
This book is filled with the power of stories. I actually wrote it, and I paused one day. It was almost finished, and I realized this is a waste of time, because it was filled with research from academics. It had statistics. It had all the stuff. And I just felt very strongly in my heart that, who am I writing this to? And I thought, I want to write it to the ordinary guy. Perhaps he works in a factory or a trade. I'm particularly writing to a guy who's not even a great reader. So we completely stripped it back, pulled all the statistics, all the research out, and just told stories. Guys like stories. And I think pastors and leaders just need to tell stories. And so we wrote it, shrunk it down, took a third of it out, 24 short chapters. and men are saying, I can do this. You know, our attention span, right?
Uh-huh.
Possum, you know, that's the male attention span. And so I think probably the master stroke of this project is it's really ordinary and really simple. And no, Jesus spoke in fairly clear language, and that's what we wanted to do. And my plea to pastors and leaders is help the man in your world. Because when you help them, you help the family. When you help the family, you help the community, and we can see the kingdom come, and we can see healing begin across our land.
That's really good. Why do you think it's so prevalent and significant specifically with men, fathers?
Interesting. Why do I think? I think it's because men and women are so differently wired. I'm not for a minute suggesting women haven't been through some painful experiences. Some of them, it's been horrendous.
Sure.
But the difference between a man and a woman, women are more happy to talk. Chat.
Yeah.
Men push it down. We have a movement here in Australia. It's not a Christian organization, but it's a very helpful organization called Are You Okay? 2 letters, Are You, and then okay. And it's been founded by a man who sadly died young of cancer, but he was a man that worked on construction sites, and he started becoming so aware of men, builders and plumbers and the like, who were taking their own life. They were big and strong, and they looked so fit and happy and healthy on the outside, and yet they were crumbling on the inside. And as he started to explore this, there was a common thread. They just didn't talk to anybody. And so we even have in Australia now a thing called Are You Okay Day, where we have a concept over here, Virgil, called mates. It's kind of friends, but next level. If I say you're my mate, I mean, that's pretty special. You can have hundreds of friends, but you've only got a few mates. And so we say, check with your mate and ask them, are you okay? Women often don't need to be asked that question. They're willing to volunteer it.
Yeah.
Men, for some reason, we have this facade and we push it down and we get on with life. You know, there is a field of thought that suggests that we're built for war, so we harden up and we toughen up and we look great on the outside, but on the inside, we're dying. And I think that's the difference between men and women. And I think we've got to start some new conversations.
Mm.
I had a really tough experience. My own life and ministry came a little unstuck in the year 2018. It had just been a really brutal, as Sam Chan says, I'd been through those leadership years, and it was really brutal in both our local church and in our movement. My mother, who was a force of nature, had a stroke and lingered for 3 years. And she was like Margaret Thatcher, my mom, and she was a powerful woman. And to watch her for 3 years lie in a bed and not speak and just stare at a wall was brutal. My wife's brother died suddenly, etc. It was just a rough year, and I started to come unstuck, and I started to realize that if I don't start talking to some people, I'm going to be in a place where it's going to be very, very difficult to come back. And, I started sharing that with leaders. I'd speak at conferences from Psalm 23, a psalm which sadly we just relegate to funerals and weddings. It's a powerful leadership psalm. A king wrote it. A king who was a shepherd, and he speaks of his God as a shepherd. And he says, of our God, he says, he restores my soul. And I realized that a lot of us as leaders, physically we could be okay, spiritually we could okay, but it's in our soul, it's in our emotions. We take so many hits. Leadership sometimes can be like death by 1,000 cuts.
Yep.
So I got to a point where I thought, you know what, I'm going to tell my story. And as I shared it and shared from this psalm, so many leaders came forward and said, you know something, when you get honest, you give permission for us to get honest. And I think it's time. We've arrived in an era where